Hello, my friend. Today I bring you another lost legend from the depths of Middle-earth. Close your eyes, feel the magic surround you. Our journey begins.
There is a hill that burns without fire, not with light, not with ash, but with a warmth that does not touch the skin, only the breath, only the memory. The locals call it the Candle Rise, though no candle has ever been lit there, and none who live near will climb it after dusk. They say the grass forgets footsteps before they finish falling. They say sound turns backwards as you ascend, but mostly they say nothing. Only their silence repeats it. At the base of that hill is a tree that has never flowered, not even in spring. Its bark is smooth and silvered, as if the moon had carved it in sleep. And where the branches should reach, upward, outward, toward rain or sky, they curl inward instead, touching their own shadow. On its trunk are 12 shallow marks, made long ago by a blade that no longer exists. No one tends the tree, no one waters it, yet it does not die. It leans into the wind, but never away from it, as if listening for something that will not come. When I was a child, I asked my mother what lived on the hill. She answered with the story of a name that was once spoken by fire, a name not written, but carried on the back of a bird, too bright to nest, too old to sing. She said the hill had kept it safe. I did not understand then what it meant for a hill to keep a name. Now I do. I've walked the edge of Candle Rise every winter since I first heard the story. Never to reach the top, only to mark the change, the way the moss thickens in years of grief, the way the wind sharpens when no one is born beneath the tree, the way the sky seems to hush itself when twilight comes early, as if bracing for something unremembered. There are stone steps carved into the far side of the slope. They are shallow, uneven, worn by centuries of feet that never returned. Some say they were made by pilgrims. Others say by a man who came back from death and no longer cast a shadow. I do not know. The steps do not lead to a shrine nor a monument. They lead to a circle of scorched earth where nothing grows, not even lichen. But the air there glows, faintly, only at dusk, only in silence. I once laid my hand on the soil within that circle. It was warm, not like sun-warmed stone or the hush of a hearth, but like something breathing beneath, something slow, patient, something that had forgotten pain, but not the shape of it. Beneath that same earth, they say, is buried a cloak that will never rot, and beneath the cloak, a body, and beneath the body, a vow. No words have been spoken over the hill in living memory. The villagers walk in wide arcs, muttering charms stitched from silence. They tell their children not to dream near the rise, not because it is cursed, but because dreams born in its shadow never return unchanged. The inn near the road bears a single painting in its main hall, faded, unlabeled. It shows the hill in autumn. Gold leaves caught mid-fall, a figure standing at the summit, head bowed back to the sky. No features remain on the face, only the outline of hair, white gold, rising slightly, as if stirred by a wind no one else could feel. Some say the painting is unfinished, but when I look at it, I see a story too old to end. There is an alcove beneath my home, where the bees once kept a hollow hive. I keep a jar of the last honey on a shelf there. It darkened over the years, thickened, turned amber, the color of an old scar. When the wind brushes the eaves, sometimes it hums against the jar, and the whole alcove smells of pine smoke and something older. That scent followed me the first time I climbed the hill alone. Not far, only to the first step. It was spring, yet frost clung to the edge of the stones. Not cold, but glistening, like breath held too long. I remember placing my foot on the lowest one and feeling a weight settle in my bones. Not fear, not warning, more like being remembered by something I had forgotten. I stepped back. The frost vanished. The next day, the tree bloomed for the first time. 3 flowers, pale, near translucent, their edges curled inward like the mouths of sleeping children. They did not fall. They faded, slowly, as if returning to a shape they once were before they became petals. No one spoke of it, but that night, the innkeeper lit a candle by the painting and did not put it out, not even in the morning. That year, the bell in the chapel rang without hands. Once, only once. Some said the sound came from the hill. Others said it came from beneath the ground, as though someone had remembered the bell's name after forgetting it for too long. I heard it in my dreams. I still do. It always ends the same way. A figure walking through fog, toward a fire that does not flicker. The figure carries nothing, leaves no mark. And as they step towards the flame leans toward them. Not to burn, to return. And just before the dream ends, the wind speaks. But not in words, in memory. And I wake with the name on my lips. I do not know how to speak. The tree does not bloom anymore, but the mark on its bark has deepened. Not by blade, not by hand, only by time. 12 cuts, each smaller than the last, the final one barely visible. But if you press your palm against the bark and close your eyes, you can feel it, like the faintest heat, like the breath of a flame that died long ago, still reaching for the voice that once called it back, or perhaps for the silence that followed. I once met a man who could not remember his father's face, but wept each time he heard a bell toll after rain. He lived alone at the edge of the valley, where the reeds whispered louder than the wind, and his windows were always covered in linen, too sheer to block light, yet too old to keep clean. When I asked him why, he said the shadows on the glass looked like letters from someone who had forgotten how to write. He only ever lit 1 candle at a time. It was from him I first heard the story of the names. Not written, not spoken, but felt, etched in places where no carving remained. On stones near the hill, on the backs of spoons, on the damp bark of trees bent by grief. Names that did not belong to anyone still living, yet could not be buried. Names that hung in the air like warmth left behind by a breath long since gone. He told me the hill was once a place of witness, not judgment, not reverence, just quiet witnessing, where a soul might go if it had nothing left to give and yet could not bear to leave. He said the fire that lived beneath the soil had not burned anything in centuries, but it remembered, and remembering was sometimes worse. The fields around Candle Rise grow crops thinner than they ought to. Not barren, but quiet, like food grown in the shadow of a forgotten oath. The harvest always arrives later than expected, and every 10th season, a stalk grows that carries no seed, only a coil of white thread, tangled around itself like a knot of light. Those who find one bury it, not with words, only silence. Once a boy tried to keep it, carried the thread around his neck, bound in glass, said it gave him warmer dreams. For a season, he laughed louder than he had in years. The village held its breath. Then, one night, the dream stopped, and the boy stopped waking. They say he sleeps still, in a room where no candle stays lit, where his chest rises only when no one watches, where, even now, the thread hums. There's a gate on the north side of the hill, almost hidden beneath a thorned hedge. It is not locked, but the rust on its hinges never gives way, even when forced. I once saw a sparrow perch on it and heard the metal moan, though the bird weighed nothing. The sound did not echo. It folded, as if it were falling inward, back into something older than hearing. The day I found the gate, the sky was full of moths, not flying, drifting, as though reluctant to land. Their wings matched the stones scattered around the base of the tree, pale, cracked, patterned with lines that almost formed letters. I held one to the light and saw, for just a second, the outline of a face I could not recognize, but whose sorrow I knew without question. I dropped the stone. The moth stayed. That evening, the steps up Gondolin shimmered as if wet, though no rain had come. I stood at their edge, just near enough to see how the light broke along their edges, but too far to hear the hush at the top. And I wondered, if no one climbs the hill, does it still wait? Or had it begun, slowly, to forget us? There's a woman who lives west of the orchard, past the stream that smells of coins left too long in a pocket. She wears gloves, even in summer, and tends to a garden that never fruits. Only vines, only leaves shaped like stars with their tips curled inward. She once told me she speaks to someone who does not speak back, a figure made of ash and gold who stands at the foot of her dreams and listens. She says he's waiting for something only he can carry, but he cannot lift it, not until this 13th bloom. When I asked her what that meant, she closed her eyes and placed a hand on her chest, just over her ribs, as though remembering the absence of a wound. Later, she gave me a bundle of dried vines tied in silk thread, told me to place it beneath the roots of the tree when the wind forgot its name. I have not done it yet, but I feel the thread in my pocket some days, heavier than it should be. There's a place just east of the hill where the earth dips into a hollow. If you speak there, your voice does not echo. It answers, not with words, with memory, the kind that does not belong to you, yet leaves your mouth shaped as though it did. I've stood in that hollow twice. Both times, I left with a song I'd never heard on my lips, one that made no sense and rhymed only in grief. The second time, I wept, not because the song was sad, because I had forgotten I knew how. The hill, I think, does not need to be climbed. It already lives within the ones who look at it and say nothing, within the spaces between names that no longer fit our mouths, within the echo of bells that were never cast but still ring, but not for us, not yet. There is a story carved on the wall of the inn's oldest room, where no one sleeps, and the hearth remains cold no matter how many embers are placed inside. The carving is faint, nearly erased by time and soot. But if you tilt your head just so and breathe slowly, you can see it, a flame in the shape of a man, or a man in the shape of a flame. It does not burn the house, only the space behind the eyes. Some say that is where he rests now, not buried, not risen, just waiting, not for return, for remembrance. But no one can say the name aloud, not because it is forbidden, because it was never taught, only passed softly from silence to silence, like a candle handed backward in the dark. And I wonder sometimes, when the tree groans in the wind and the frost sings on the stairs, if the hill breathes through us, or if we are simply what's left of its dream. There is a room near the southern wall of the old monastery, a place without roof or name. The stone arches still stand, though the wind walks freely through them now, brushing dust from the carved sigils that no one has dared translate. The walls are cool in summer, and in winter they whisper, not from the cold, but from memory caught in the mortar. They say this room never had a door, no hinges, no threshold, no trace of entry. It simply was, and it faced nothing. Not east, not west, not toward the sun's path or the moon's drift. It faced inward, as if turning its back on the sky. The villagers no longer go near it, though they leave herbs on the nearby stones, wrapped in cloth and tied with the same thread that grows once every 10th harvest. They say it keeps the dreams quiet, or if not quiet, then blurred, soft enough to forget by morning. But there are those who remember still, not fully, not in order, just enough to feel a weight at the back of the tongue when silence grows too deep. I have stood in that room 3 times. The first, the fog was thick and low, curling around my ankles like something homesick. There were no birds, no insects, no sound, but my own breath, which seemed to echo, not outward, but back toward me, changed slightly, as though it had passed through someone else's throat. I left without crossing the center. The second time, the stone floor was warm, despite frost on the grass beyond. I knelt and placed my hand flat against the middle tile. The one carved with concentric rings, faded to the color of old bone. A low hum stirred in my ribs, not painful, not loud, just known, as if something buried remembered being found. I pressed my ear to the ground and heard it clearly. Not a voice, a name, my name, but older, and wept without knowing why. The third time, I found a bowl, wooden, cracked, left in the exact center of the room, as if placed with care. It was dry, empty, but smelled faintly of rosemary and ash. I picked it up, and beneath it, nestled in the dust, was a single thread. Not white this time, not red, silver. It shimmered only when held away from the light. When brought near the sun, it faded, turned the color of fog. I pocketed it without thinking, though my fingers trembled. That night, I dreamed of a fire that did not burn, and a man standing in it, not consumed but hollowed. Like a candle burned through, its center gone, its light still trembling. He did not look at me, but I felt seen. The thread was gone by morning. Only its shape remained, pressed into the cloth of my coat like a pressed flower, invisible to the eye but unmistakable to the hand. I traced it often in the days that followed, sometimes without realizing. I would speak to someone and find my fingers moving in circles, as if stitching something no longer torn. Some said that room was built long before the monastery, before the road even, when the land still carried its own names. That it was not meant for shelter or prayer, but as a tether, not to keep something in, but to hold something from leaving too far. There are tales, whispered, never written, of those who were returned, not born again, not summoned, returned, as if memory itself gathered enough sorrow to shape a body. They come from the fire, some say, not flames, but flame-shaped absence, walking with steps that make no sound, eyes lit not by soul, but recognition. They do not speak, but if you listen closely, the wind around them sometimes sings, and it is never a new song, always a remembering. There was an elder in the village who used to draw maps on bark, not of places, but of times. His lines curled and twisted like vines, connecting one season to another without any visible road. When asked what they meant, he would say, "These are the places that never moved, but the world forgot how to stand near them." One map showed the room, drawn not as stone, but as flame, and beside it a single line of text. When the thread returns to the bowl, the hill will speak. No one knew what it meant, but they stopped asking him to explain. Years later, I returned to the room with that map in my pocket. The bowl was gone, but in the dust, someone had drawn a spiral with their finger. Not perfectly. It wavered, as if done while weeping. At its center, something shimmered. Not light, not dust. A memory. Mine, maybe, but not from this life. It smelled of cypress and old linen, of a fire doused with silence, of the air after a name is spoken too late. I knelt, not to pray, not to gather, just to be. The spiral faded before my eyes, crumbling into nothing, and the warmth beneath the stones withdrew, as though startled. I left with nothing in my hands, but my shadow followed closer than before. And I dreamed of steps ascending a hill of ash toward a fire that pulsed like a heartbeat. The wind whispered something behind me. I did not turn. Some doors do not need to be opened. Some are already inside you, waiting for the right silence to begin. They say the hill never moved, not even when the valley shifted in the great rains, or when the stars themselves fell in crooked lines above it, like a child's drawing in ash. The land around it changed. Trees swallowed paths, rivers learned new names, entire villages turned to lichen and silence. But the hill remained, round and smooth and quiet, as though waiting. I visited it only once in daylight. It was late autumn then, the kind where the air feels not cold, but hollow, like something has been taken out of it and not returned. The leaves were not gold, not red. They had browned without fire, curled without pride. They clung to the branches as if unsure how to fall. At the hill's base, the grass was thin and silvered, growing in odd concentric rings, like the ripple of a dropped thought. No birds sang there, no insects danced, only the wind stirred. And even that, with apology. I brought no offering that day, only myself and the silence I had carried since the bowl vanished. I did not speak. I had learned by then that words rust in places like this. They decay before they leave the tongue, falling as dust in the throat. So I breathed and listened and let my steps fall into the rhythm of the earth. Midway up the hill, I found the first mark. It was not a stone, not quiet. It looked like one from a distance, mossed and soft-edged. But when I touched it, I felt the faint resistance of bone. Not human, not animal, something else. Something old enough that even the moss whispered around it, rather than over it. I knelt beside it and placed my palm gently upon its surface. It was warm, not hot, not from sun, but from memory. I closed my eyes and saw light, not blinding, not sharp, but flickering, like fire seen through tears. And in that light stood a figure, blurred by distance, yet unmistakably still. Still like water untouched for centuries. Still, like grief that never became rage. Their face was not shown, but I felt they were watching the hill, not guarding, not mourning, just remembering. I opened my eyes. The stone was cool again. The wind had paused. Higher up, the air grew thinner, not in breath, but in time. The light no longer felt tied to the sun. It glowed as though shaped by will, not sky. My steps made no sound. The soil, soft elsewhere, was hard here. Hardened not by weather, but by knowing. Each green backed tight by the weight of eyes unseen. At the crown of the hill stood a ring of standing stones, crumbled, half buried, but arranged still with sacred purpose. Not a circle, not quite. More like a spiral interrupted. Some said the stones were graves, Others believed them to be mockers of a path meant only for the dead to walk. But when I reached them, I did not feel dread, only stillness and something like waiting. In the very center of the spiral, the grass did not grow, not from rot, but reverence. The soil was pale there, not white, not grey, but the color of sleep, and in it sat the remnants of fire, ash long cooled, untouched by wind, perfectly round, perfectly silent. No wood, no charcoal, only the outline of something once lit and now remembered, and in its center, the imprint of a foot, bare, small, and facing downward, as if someone had stepped into the flame, not from above, but from below. I reached out, not to touch it, but to feel its shape in the air above, and as my hand hovered there, a breeze rose from the east, soft, fragrant, familiar. It smelled of the same rosemary and ash from the bowl in the room without doors. It curled around my wrist, tugging gently, like the memory of a friend long buried. And in that wind, I heard it again. The song, not sung aloud, but carried in breath. Syllables older than the mouth, notes shaped by sorrow, not voice. It wound through the stones like smoke that forgot how to rise, curling around each mark, tracing each ruin. I sat, I listened, I wept, not because it hurt, but because it knew me, knew the part of me that still knelt beside a cradle that never rocked, knew the part of me that still waited for the fire to return. Night came without stars. The hill held it close, like a mother who knows the name of the dark. The spiral stones cast no shadow, but in their presence, I felt less alone. I slept then, or something near it, and in that not sleep, I saw the thread again. Silver, then red, then gold, twisting in the wind above a flame that burned without heat. The figure stood once more. Only now I could see their eyes. They were empty, not hollow, not blind, empty like a well too deep for memory. They raised their hand, and in it, the bowl, unbroken, unburned, filled not with water, not with light, but with names, so many names, all unspoken, all mine. When I awoke, the fire was gone, but the ashes remained. And in the center, not a footstep, but a single curled thread, silver. I left it there. Some memories are not meant to be carried. Some are meant only to be witnessed and forgotten just enough that they may return again. When the hill is ready, when the bowl is empty, when the flame remembers where it began, there is a place in the valley where the water moves without reflection. It curls between stone and reed like thread through a silent loom. But no face has ever been mirrored in its skin. Not the moon, not the stars, not the clouds that pass with such mournful grace above it. It does not shimmer. It does not shine. It only carries forward, forward, as though memory were a weight too ancient to be stilled. They call it the morning thread. No map marks it, and no path leads to its edge. It finds those who are ready, or perhaps those who are not, but no longer resist. I came upon it by accident, though I've long since stopped believing in such things. The hill had emptied me. I had slept, or not slept, in the spiral. I had dreamt, or not dreamt, of the thread curled like a question above the ashes. And when I walked down the hill, the valley had changed, not in form, but in knowing. Trees leaned differently. Moss held its breath. The stones along the slope whispered with the hush of names not yet spoken. And where once the forest ended in bramble and bone, now it parted, gently, deliberately, to reveal the stream. It did not babble. It did not sing. Its sound was that of cloth, torn slowly by unseen hands. A soft, uneven rhythm, like breath through teeth that no longer bite. like the last prayer held in a cracked mouth. I stood at its edge and looked down, not at myself, for there was nothing to see, but into the dark. And there, the glint, not light, not gold, just a shimmer, as if something beneath had tried once to speak in reflection and failed. I knelt. The earth was damp, but not cold. It held heat like sorrow held silence. Long past understanding, but never truly gone. I placed one hand to the soil and the other to the water. The current did not resist. It passed beneath my palm with the gentleness of something that had learned long ago not to disturb the living. I listened, and after a while, the stream began to speak, not in voice, not in word, but in image, memory, not mine. Visions passed through bone and fog and distant names. A tree bending over a crib that never rocked. A bowl filled not with water, but with dust that gleamed. A stair carved into a mountainside, worn smooth by footsteps that ended before they began. A woman, perhaps, though the shape was vague, her hair trailing behind her in windless air. She held something in her hands, cradled like a wound. Not a child, not a vessel, something between. She wept, though no tears fell, only threads, one by one, falling into the stream, silver, red, gold. They drifted with the current, catching on reeds, dissolving like breath against stone. And still she held the shape. Still she waited. I blinked, and the image faded, but the feeling remained. I rose and followed the stream. It led me not forward, but inward. Trees thickened. The light dimmed, though it was not yet dusk. Ferns brushed against my skin like questions too soft to voice. And the stream, the thread, deepened. At first, only slightly, then more, until it ran beside me like a wound without end. And there, nestled against a bend in the earth, I saw it. A shrine, no taller than my shoulder, carved of blackwood, stained with lichen, softened by moss. It bore no runes, no symbol, only a hollow at its center, as if once it held a flame or a heart. Around it, the remnants of offering, dried flowers the color of rust, stones arranged in a crescent, and a single silver ribbon knotted around the trunk of a leaning birch. I sat before it. The stream paused here, not stopped, no, never that, but slowed, as though remembering. I placed my hand upon the shrine's crown, and warmth met me. A warmth older than fire, older than breath. A warmth that came not from heat, but from presence. For a moment, no more than that, I was seen, not watched, seen, and I knew, not the name, not the purpose, only the ache. The shrine had waited long, and I had nothing to offer, only a memory that was not mine. So I gave it, the thread, the bowl, the hill, the song, the absence. I gave it in stillness, in silence, in sleep that hovered without ever falling. And when I stood, the shrine was empty still, but the ribbon on the birch had changed. Once silver, now red. It fluttered in a wind that did not touch my skin, and the stream, the morning thread, resumed its passage. I turned from the shrine, not healed, not broken, but known. And somewhere behind me, the sound of cloth torn slowly began again, software even, irreversible. It was not far from the stream, though distance in that part of the valley seemed no longer governed by steps. I had turned from the shrine, the ribbon still whispering behind me, and walked not forward, but through. The forest did not open, it folded. Trees leaned to one side, as if in quiet procession, and the air thickened with lichen-sweet breath. I moved slowly, not from fear but from reverence. There were places where even memory did not run, and I had begun to suspect this was one of them. The moss deepened. Beneath it, the soil felt strangely hollow, as though something vast and long forgotten slumbered just beneath the surface. I heard no birds, only the sigh of leaves, and beneath that, something gentler still, a rhythm not quite a sound, like breath drawn in beneath centuries, like weeping too old to fall as tears. There was no path, and yet I followed something. A curve in the ground, a silence shaped like invitation. And then I found it. The tree. It stood in the center of a clearing that had no sky. Its crown, if it had one, had long since disappeared into the tangled canopy above. What remained was trunk, thick, gnarled, streaked with bark, the color of rusted bronze. Roots spilled out from its base, like limbs frozen in retreat. And at the center of those roots, nestled like a truth the earth had tried to swallow, was a bell, no taller than my hand, no brighter than dusk, made not of metal, but of something older. Bone, perhaps, or petrified bloom. A bell that bore no markings, and yet felt named. It did not ring, it did not move, but the air around it trembled slightly, as though sound had tried, once, to pass through it and been forgotten midway. I stepped closer. There was no resistance, no warning, only stillness. The kind of stillness one finds near graves not tended, but remembered. I knelt beside the bell and placed 2 fingers on its crown, cold, but not lifeless. The moment I touched it, the trees ceased breathing, the moss went silent, and the roots beneath me shifted, not with movement, but memory. I saw a room carved beneath the mountain, lit not by flame, but by reflection. A woman with her hands bound in red thread, seated before an empty cradle carved from ashwood and night. She did not speak. She did not blink. She simply watched the space where something should have been, and was not. Then, the sound, low, so low it passed through rather than around. A bell, 1 note, then silence. I withdrew my hand. The vision vanished like dew touched by shadow, but the feeling it left did not. The bell was waiting, not to be rung, but to be remembered. I reached into the pouch at my side. I carried no trinkets, no runes, no relics, only a strip of linen, once part of a shroud laid over my mother's eyes in her final hour. I did not know why I had brought it. I only knew it belonged here. I placed it gently across the bell's shoulders. The linen held for a breath, and then, without wind, without touch, it fell, curled around the roots like sleep, and the bell exhaled, not in sound, in memory. A figure cloaked in frost, placing the bell at the base of the tree. A whisper passed from lips cracked by oath. The promise of return, the promise of silence, a promise broken. The roots had grown since then, had held the bell fast in their embrace, not out of protection, but refusal. I stood and backed away, never turning. When the clearing disappeared behind me, the air softened. The moss breathed again. Leaves resumed their slow morning dance, but the silence of the bell lingered. It rang inside my chest where no sound belonged. It hummed in the space between questions never asked, and I understood. Not the why, not the who, only the shape of absence, carved like a cradle beneath a mountain, carried like a bell beneath the roots. Past the bell's hush and the tree that forgot to bloom, the land dipped into a hollow no map would mark. There was no sound as I descended, only the slow drag of moss underfoot, and the way each branch above seemed to bend not with age, but listening. I carried the weight of the silence with me, the impression of the bell's unringing still lodged in the space between thought and breath. It was dusk when I reached the edge of the orchard. Though the sky above gave no clue of time, the trees there were unlike the others, pale-trunked, narrow, each leaning slightly inward as though ashamed to witness the clearing's heart. Their leaves had long since fallen, or perhaps had never grown at all. In their place hung fruit, dim and low-hanging, neither ripe nor rotten, their skin the color of dying embers. They gave off no scent, no warmth, only light, a light that did not touch. I stepped between the first two trees and felt the change. The ground here was softer, yielding beneath my boots as though I walked not on soil, but woven dusk. The air smelled faintly of iron and wilted herbs. A hush layered itself over the clearing, like ash that never fell. And though my footsteps were careful, they made no sound. There were no birds, no insects, nothing but the trees and the fruit, and the way their shadows leaned toward one another, never quite touching. I did not eat. Even the thought was foreign. The fruit was not made for hunger. It pulsed dimly with something older than sustenance. The memory of light, perhaps, or the residue of a choice too sacred to name. In the center of the orchard stood a pedestal of stone, round, flat, low to the ground. It bore no markings, no crown, only dust and a slight hollow, as though something had once rested there and been removed without consent. Around its base, the fallen fruit did not rot. They remained whole, dim, intact, like lanterns buried under years of silence. I knelt beside the pedestal. The stone was warm. That was the first sorrow. Not with the heat of sun or flame, but the warmth of breath held too long, the warmth of something once alive, now memory. I pressed a hand to it and let my eyes close, and I saw her again. Not clearly, never clearly, but enough. She stood beneath one of the orchard's trees, her back to me, holding a single piece of fruit in both hands. Her hair hung down like old rain, and her robe bore no hem. Around her, the trees whispered, not in voice, but in posture, leaning, tilting, aching. She did not move. She only stared at the fruit in her palms as though it had spoken something she could not unhear. When I opened my eyes, the pedestal was unchanged, but the air had shifted. There, beside the nearest tree, was a shape I had not noticed before, a bench, carved from a single block of petrified root, smoothed by time and grief. I sat without question. The stone beneath me was cold, and for a long time I did not move. Not until I noticed the echo. Not sound, not truly, but a pressure, a presence. As if someone had once sat beside me, long ago, and the bench had not yet forgotten. I did not speak. There was no need. Some silences are conversations left to wither. Instead, I looked at the orchard, and the orchard looked back. The fruit pulsed again, faintly in unison. Once, then again, like breath, like waiting, somewhere far off, beyond the orchard's rim, a single bell note failed to ring. I felt it, a hollow in the chest, a vibration swallowed by soil. And I remembered the thread, the shrine, the ribbon turned red. The memory was not mine, but it had settled into me like a name whispered only once. Perhaps the orchard knew that name. Perhaps it waited not to be spoken, but returned. I stood, and the bench remained quiet. At the pedestal once more, I reached into my satchel. The linen was gone, left behind with the bell. But in its place was a small shard of glass, round-edged, clouded. I had not placed it there. I had no memory of carrying it. Still, I set it in the pedestal's hollow. It did not fit, but it did not fall. The fruit pulsed once more, then stilled. No wind stirred the trees. No birds returned to the branches. But somewhere, deep in the orchard's root-silent heart, I heard the hush of a voice that had not yet been born. Not a word, Not a cry, only a shape, a name unspoken, and the weight of a promise that had not yet decided whether to keep itself. Beyond the orchard's hush, where even echoes folded inward, I found a path carved not by feet but by forgetting. It began where the last tree dared to stand and wound into the slope of a hill that bore no peak. There was no soil here, only stone, layered, veined, and damp with the breath of centuries. Moss clung to it, not as growth, but remembrance, as if the rock itself once knew water and had been waiting since. The stair began beneath an arch of bramble, thornless, dry, and unnaturally white, not bleached, but drained, like bone that had forgotten what it held. I ducked beneath it, and the silence changed again. Not deeper, not louder, only older. Each step was uneven, each edge worn more by memory than erosion. Some widened unexpectedly, others narrowed so sharply that I had to pause to cross them. But the stone never cracked. It held together as though shaped by something that could not bear collapse. I descended without knowing whether I moved up or down. The stair did not bend, but the light did. Faint, silvered, diffused like breath on cold glass. There was no sky, no ceiling, only this spiral that led inward and the sound of my own presence softening. There were carvings, subtle, half erased. Not letters, not symbols, but impressions. A handprint, long dried. A single feather etched in shallow relief. A crescent, worn smooth by the brushing of many shoulders, all bowed, all silent. I ran my fingers along them, not to read, but to feel the residue of passage. The stone was cold, but not unkind. At the 28th step, though counting held no meaning, I paused. There was an opening in the wall, just wide enough for a body, just tall enough for grief. It led into a chamber. Not a room, a chamber. Cavernous, low, not built, but bled into shape. It was lit by nothing, yet the walls glimmered with the sheen of wet memory. No torch would hold here. No fire would belong, and so I entered with only the orchard's residue in my eyes. The air tasted of silver, and deep beneath that, of ash. At the far end of the chamber was a pool, shallow, wide, still. Its surface did not ripple. Not even when I knelt beside it, not even when my breath fell too near. The water reflected nothing. Not the ceiling, not the walls, not me. Only a door, carved in light, not gold, not sun, but a softer luminance. The kind one finds just before snowfall, when the world begins to hush. The door hovered just beneath the surface, as if waiting to rise. I did not touch it. Not then. Instead, I sat on the stone edge and waited. For what, I could not name. But the stair had brought me here, and I did not think it would carry me back. From the far side of the chamber, opposite where I had entered, came the faintest sound, not voice, not footfall, the memory of breath, as though someone had once gasped, not in fear, but in recognition, and the air had kept it. I turned slowly. There, embedded in the wall, was a niche. Within it, a mirror, small, round, cracked across its center. Its surface had darkened with age, but behind the glass, something moved. Not image, not reflection, but shadow. It pulsed faintly, in time with nothing. I stepped toward it. The closer I came, the colder the stone beneath my feet. When I stood before it, the shadow vanished, and I saw her again. This time she faced me. Her eyes were closed, and her lips parted as if in mid-word. Her hair fell around her like a veil, and in her hands, always her hands, she held something I could not see. Only the shape, a curve, a glow, a wound. Then the mirror dimmed, and the chamber exhaled. The pool behind me shimmered, and I turned, not quickly, but as one might in a dream, half waking. The door had risen, still beneath the surface, still unreachable, but now visible in full. No handle, no key, only light, and a single mark upon it, a circle broken at its base. I knew it, though I could not name it. I had seen it once on a ribbon buried in a shrine. I had seen it once in the hush of a bell, and now it waited, not for opening, but for remembering. I sat once more beside the pool, and as the stair behind me faded into distance and the mirror went dark again, I leaned closer to the water's edge and whispered a name I did not know was mine to speak. The surface trembled, the mark shimmered, but the door did not open. Still, it heard me. And in that listening, the stone itself began to dream. The stair had vanished, not in haste nor ruin, but in the manner of things that no longer wished to be remembered. Where once stone had guided descent, now there was only the hush of walls drawn inward, like lungs that had forgotten breath. The chamber held me, not as prisoner nor guest, but as something more ancient, a keeper made from what could not leave. I remained beside the pool. The surface no longer shimmered. The door beneath it, once traced, in glimmering light, had grown dim, the broken circle fading like a half-remembered dream at the edge of morning. Yet I did not fear its fading. I had begun to understand. This place did not answer calls. It waited for forgetting. The mirror in the niche remained veiled in shadow. The woman's image, so briefly offered, had not returned. But the silence that followed her was heavier now, not oppressive, only deliberate, as if the stones themselves needed time to listen. And so I waited. There is a kind of stillness that reshapes the body, not through change, but release. My limbs no longer yearned to move. My eyes adjusted, not to light, but to memory. Even my thoughts, once filled with echoes of paths and orchards and names, grew quieter, slower, like leaves descending through water. It was then the moss began to bloom. I hadn't noticed it at first. It was not the green of surface life, nor the creeping tendrils of forest damp. This moss was pale, nearly colorless, like frost caught in time. It emerged from the cracks in the chamber's wall, tiny tufts at first, soft, downy, glowing faintly as though lit from within. But where it grew, the stone seemed to soften, as if yielding to something gentler than touch. I leaned close to the moss nearest the pool. Its shape curled inward, like ears turned toward a sound no longer spoken. There were tiny filaments within it, whisper thin, twitching not with air but memory. I could feel them when I exhaled, not shifting, but remembering. There was something beneath them. Stone, yes, but etched. Letters, number A name. Faint, broken, scattered across the moss like fallen snow over forgotten bones. But not in any tongue I knew. Only the shape of the name was left. Syllables cradled in silence. I brushed a single finger across the moss. It sighed, not aloud, but inside me. And beneath the sigh, I heard it again. The breath I had heard in the chamber before. A voice buried in time's marrow, not calling, not weeping, only existing, like the rustle of robes long hung in the dark. My own name wavered inside me and was met with another, not in sound, not in speech, but in knowing. I saw her again, not in the mirror, not in the pool, not even in vision. She stood in the space just behind my closed eyes, no longer veiled in waterlight, no longer motionless. She was walking slowly through a corridor of stone and vine, her hands trailing along the walls as if searching not for escape, but return. And in her hands, I saw it clearly now. She held a crown, but not of metal. It was made from the same pale moss that bloomed in the chamber, threaded with strands of hair, weathered ribbon, and root. A crown of forgetting, woven from what had once been sacred. She placed it at the edge of a shore I could not see, and turned, not to me, but to a shadow cast by nothing. Then she was gone. When I opened my eyes, the moss around the chamber had spread, slowly, silently, no longer tufts, but a soft field that reached the base of the pool and circled the mirror. It did not grow upward, only outward, like something that had once been a song and now remembered only its rhythm. The pool shimmered again, but not with light, with depth, not downward, but inward, as if the water had turned to mirror, and the mirror to veil, and the veil to silence. The broken circle on the door had changed, not repaired, not erased, completed by absence. The gap at its base now glowed faintly, not from filling, but from what had left it. It was a wound that had learned to shine. I did not rise. I did not call to it. I merely placed my hand on the stone beside me, and the chamber pulsed with warmth, not heat, but memory held near. And then a bell, distant, low, carried not by air, but through the bones of the earth. It did not repeat. Its echo folded back into the walls, like a name returned to silence. The moss paused, as if listening. And in that pause, I understood. The door would not open. Not now. Not for me. But it had heard my waiting. And that, here, was the first step. So I leaned forward, into the reflectionless water, and whispered a name I had not spoken in lifetimes. Not mine. Heron. The moss curled tighter. The mirror cracked again. And somewhere beyond the door, the ground remembered how to dream. The chamber had not changed, yet something within it had shifted, not in shape or color, but in meaning. The moss had ceased its bloom and now simply remained, not dead, not growing. It lay still as snowfall before a thaw, each tuft a breath held mid-sigh. The pool no longer shimmered, nor did it need to. Its silence had deepened into something that resembled waiting, though for whom or what I did not yet know. The name I had whispered, hers, lingered in the stone. It had no echo, yet the walls held it gently, as a forgotten cradle holds the scent of a vanished child. I had not meant to speak. It had simply arrived on my tongue, born not from memory but from recognition. A name older than language, older, perhaps, than sorrow. The mirror had not fallen. It remained in its alcove, veiled in its familiar frost. But the crack that had once fractured its surface now spiraled outward, delicate as the veins of a leaf turned brittle in autumn. I did not fear it. It was not broken. It was blooming. I found myself drawn to it again, not out of curiosity. That had long since left me, but because I could feel it watching, not through sight, through presence. It was like standing near a tree that remembers you, or a shore that once heard your song, the kind of watching that expects nothing but receives everything. I approached it slowly, the way one approaches a bed where someone no longer sleeps. The glass was colder now, not to the touch, to the thought. I did not raise my hand to it. I only leaned close enough to see what had changed. And I saw her once more. But not as before. Not walking, not waiting. She was kneeling now, in a circle of pale leaves. Her hair had come undone, spilling across her shoulders like threads unspooled from a tapestry too long hung. She did not weep. She was speaking, but not in sound. Her mouth moved as though repeating a vow that had no beginning. The leaves beneath her glowed faintly, not with light, but with recognition. each one a memory made visible, trembling slightly when touched by the wind of her breathless words. Around her, stone pillars crumbled in slow reverence. They did not fall, they bowed. And behind her, I saw it, a shape, not of man, not of beast, of decision. It stood like an absence wrapped in form, its edges blurred, like smoke that had chosen to remain still. And yet, in its silence, I felt the weight of 1,000 oaths never spoken, not for fear, but for knowing. The woman reached toward it, not to embrace, not to push away, to offer. And in her hand, I saw the moss crown. It was brighter now, but not with color. It shimmered with what had been taken from her, not stolen, not lost, given. The figure did not move, but something in the air around it shifted, like a forgotten doorway, remembering how to open inward. I closed my eyes, not from fear, from reverence. When I opened them, the mirror was dark again, not broken, quiet, as if it too needed rest. The moss on the floor had begun to retract, curling slowly inward, not dying, but folding, like hands at the end of a prayer. I sat once more beside the pool. The water had turned clear, but it no longer reflected. It simply held space, like a memory so deep it can no longer be spoken aloud. And the name, her name, returned to me, not as sound, but as rhythm. It hummed inside my breath. I did not repeat it. I only allowed it to exist. There is a moment in all things when they cease becoming and begin being. I believe I had reached that moment, not as ending, as offering. I lay down beside the pool. The stone was warm, not with heat, with memory. Above me, the chamber ceiling held carvings I had not seen before. Not newly made, newly remembered. Spirals, shapes, names without letters. They pulsed with the same faint light as the moss had before it folded inward. I traced one with my eyes and saw it move, not forward, deeper, into me. And then the bell returned. Once, low, closer, no echo, only presence. And in its silence, I heard the first word of a song I had never learned, but had always known. Not sung, lived. I did not rise. I only whispered once more, I remain. And the stone beneath me sighed, as if in answer. And above, the carvings slowly faded, like breath upon glass, just before the frost returns. There was no dawn in that place, but still, something like morning arrived. Not with light, but with permission. The walls did not glow, yet their silence lifted, slightly, like mist that has finished morning and now only waits. I did not rise quickly. I did not speak. I simply opened my eyes and found that the stone had remembered me. The dust, pool beside me, had drawn back, not dried, but retreated, as though making room. Its center now held something small, round and dark, not stone, not moss, not root. It was shaped like a curled petal or a closed eye. I did not reach for it. I only watched, and in watching, understood. It had not been placed. It had surfaced. From beneath memory, from beneath her. A gift, perhaps, or a remnant, or both. The mirror still stood, but the frost that veiled it had deepened to the color of old smoke, not black, not gray, but the shade of breath long held. The crack that spiraled across its surface no longer looked like a wound. It looked like a path. I thought of her, not as she was, not as I had seen her in the shimmer, but as she had been long before I ever entered this place. Before the pool, before the moss, before the tower had forgotten its purpose. And I realized I had never known her name, only its sound, not its weight. That absence now pressed gently against the walls of the chamber, not with urgency, but inevitability, like a promise, once whispered in a sleep too deep to wake from. I turned away from the mirror, not to leave it, to carry it with me. The archway through which I had come was no longer behind me, or rather, it was, but faded, thinned, like a memory that no longer knows if it belonged to dream or waking. Instead, a new passage had opened in the farthest wall, narrow, sloped, its edges soft, as if carved by water too patient for the counting of years. I stepped toward it, not to continue, to remember forward. The passage was not long, but it held a feeling of distance, as if every step took me deeper not into space, but into a version of myself I had once forgotten. The air within it was warmer. Not with heat, but with breath. I was not alone. Or perhaps I was. But differently. Shapes marked the wall, faint as dust before wind, spirals again. One repeated, a circle drawn through another, uneven, imperfect. Like something once worn or removed. The corridor opened, not into a room, but into a hollow. A place within the earth, not beneath it. The walls here were not stone. They were root, pale, dry, branching in silence. Some pulsed faintly, like veins that had learned to move without a heart. And at the center stood the altar. No gold, no carvings, only wood, faded, bowed, smoothed by absence. Upon it, the moss crown, no longer green, silver, but not metal. Silver like moonlight on ash, like memory dried into form. And beneath it, the cloak, folded, threadbare, grey as river fog. I knew it, or I had known it, or I had seen it worn in a time before time. And beside these, a single white stone, shaped like a seed that never grew. These things were not offerings. They were remains. I did not kneel. I stood, as one does before a grave. And I did not cry. I had already given that part of myself to the mirror. Instead, I touched the altar's edge. It was warm, not alive, not sacred, remembered. The stone beside the cloak began to hum, not in sound, but in feel. My bones carried it before my ears did. A hum that knew sorrow, but did not yield to it. A hum that had waited to be heard again. I did not take the seed. I only listened. And the hum spoke, not words, but shape. It filled the space behind my eyes with a vision not seen, only felt. A shore where footsteps ended before the tide came in. A tree that bloomed only when no one watched. A face turned away, not in shame, not in grief, but in refusal. A refusal to end. I placed my hand over the stone. The hum stilled, and in the stillness, I felt her beside me. Not a presence, a memory given weight. She had been here, not as priestess, not as queen, as mourner. She had placed the seed. She had folded the cloak. She had crowned the altar with moss not yet born, and left, not vanished, given. The chamber dimmed, not from darkness, from understanding, the kind that softens, the kind that does not ask. I turned once more to the altar and whispered the shape of her name. It did not echo. It settled, like dust, or ash, or the breath before the first word of a vow. And when I turned back to the passage, it had narrowed. As though asking if I still remembered how to leave, I stepped forward. Not to escape, to carry. And behind me, the stone began to hum once more, softer now, as if singing to itself.